Hello and good evening. I'm Jamie Anderson, and I've got a very special guest joining me shortly. October is Fireball XL5's birth month, and in fact, the 28th of October is its 60th anniversary. I think it would have been 62, I think at 7 p.m., although I'm waiting for my special guest in a minute to correct me on that. Fireball XL5 was first shown, Planet 4-6, and it kind of ushered in a new era of supermarionation and Anderson science fiction shows. So we couldn't let its 60th anniversary pass without some kind of celebration. And so to join me to celebrate and to announce something rather exciting, please welcome Lee Sullivan. Hello, Lee Sullivan.
Hello there. Jamie Anderson, I see your name is.
Our names are helpfully displayed here and over there so that you can see who we are. Now, lots of you watching will know exactly who Lee Sullivan is, but Lee Sullivan, for those who don't know who Lee Sullivan is, who is Lee Sullivan?
It's been asked many times. I am a comic strip artist, well, I'm an illustrator and a comic strip artist particularly, I suppose, and I'm also a big fan of all the kind of usual genre things, but in particular the Gerry Anderson series, and I have they've been around most of my life, so I'm very happy to be involved with this.
Well, you say this, we'll definitely get onto this momentarily. I mean, you've got a rather lovely display of Fireball stuff. I mean, of all the Anderson shows, is it fair to say it looms fairly large as one of your favorites or biggest sources of inspiration?
Yeah, Fireball was. I was old enough to catch Twizzle and Torchy, which is probably accounts for quite a lot. But it really got into its stride with Supercar. I loved Supercar with a great passion, and then it was. I didn't know this, so it was replaced by Fireball. And Fireball just became everything to me. I tried very hard to convert my Supercar models into Fireball XL5 models, which is not an easy task. You have to lose a lot of imagination. But no, it had everything for me at the time. And I don't suppose two other series have done that. One was Doctor Who and one was Star Trek. The first time seeing those things really smashes home into your brain, at least it did for me. Particularly things like the theme was fantastic. The music on the opening sequence is so dramatic, and kind of it's beautiful, like all the Barry Gray stuff, beautifully sets the scene for what's about to follow. And I can remember, I think it was on earlier than 7 o'clock. I can't believe it was that late in the day, but unless it's 7 o'clock in the morning. But I remember showing my auntie, I was around there for afternoon tea, I think, once, and Fireball was on. And I said, look, as Fireball comes down the launch rails here, although I probably didn't use the term launch rails, as I was only about 4 at the time, or 5 or something. Auntie, look, there's some sparks that come out. Look, there they are. And, it was just, the whole thing was totally thrilling. And as I go on at some length to anybody who talks about Fireball XL5, my favourite moment in the sequence is when you're looking behind Stephen Robert and the sky turns from blue, well, grey, light grey, into dark, and the stars come out. And it's so evocative, and it really makes, you're really going into adventure. And I think that was the brilliant thing about those series, is that that's what they do. They plunge you into adventure.
Well, let me then, without further ado, plunge us into adventure.
I can't wait.
Neat segue there, eh? I mean, I'm sure those who are watching may have possibly guessed. We're talking about Fireball XL5. You, Mr. Comics, Lee Sullivan. Well, I suppose rather obviously, at the end of this month, we are releasing a Fireball XL5 60th anniversary comic anthology. And you may also notice some familiar names at the bottom there, but we'll get to those later on. It's a beautiful cover. We'll talk about the cover momentarily. But I suppose just initially, this is a collection, an anthology of all the TV21 strips, plus some other material, which we will also get onto shortly. But as an original fan on original broadcast, I'm assuming, and now as a comics person, authority, legend, perhaps, you must have been influenced by TV Century 21, I'm assuming. So where does that sit in your childhood experience of Fireball, and how much does it connect to the TV show?
Well, TV 21 was a massive influence. I think for any kid of my age into that kind of stuff, it was just like gold coming from heaven, because for the younger viewers of this, you really only got the programs on when they delivered them on live TV, and that was it. And you didn't get to see them again. And while they were running, you saw them week by week. And when they were not running, that was it. They were gone. So to fill in the gaps, something like a comic strip became extremely important. And whilst I'd seen Neville Main's version of Fireball XL5 in TV comic. It didn't kind of grab my attention particularly, but TV 21 was just like a tidal wave, because it had all of the current, well, it was Stingray at the time, and it presaged Thunderbirds. It started to tell you things coming down the line. It was a very clever marketing thing, but also just really exciting comic, produced by, the publishing of it, it's very high quality print, probably as good as the Eagle, which was the kind of the standard of the time. But it had some fantastic artists working on it, and the sort of triumvirate of Bellamy and Embleton and Mike Noble, just they were head and shoulders above anything else that was being produced at the time, and properly the cream of strip illustration talent at the time. So you had plus, rather to counter that, you also had occasional photographs dropped into the strips in colour. And again, a colour photograph of anything that you were interested in on TV was astonishing to see it, because of course the TVs were all black and white. So even when the series started getting made in, like Stingray was in colour, but Vidicolour in our house, it didn't go from black and white to Vidicolour. It just went from black and white to black and white.
A bit less dramatic. So does that mean the first time you ever saw a colour image of Fireball might have been this very issue of TV 21?
Yes, certainly as a photograph. There had been annuals which had given the colour scheme away, but they're probably not so. No, they're a little further back than. I don't know. They're probably not far off the TV 21. But TV 21, actually seeing photographs of things, all those stills that were either posed specially for the magazine or stock photographs, were wonderful. It was wonderful to see that stuff. And of course, Fireball is such a lovely design, and beautifully colourful as well. All marvellous stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing how much consideration was given to the colour, given the final presentation and appearance on film and therefore on television.
Yes, it's interesting that, isn't it? And when you see those colour stills, of course now you can't tell them from the very clever colorized versions of them, but they are wonderful. And it came as I was slightly traumatized the first time I saw that the trousers were slightly different color to the top of the tube, because surely they should all be, it's a jumpsuit, but it isn't, obviously. So I tried to reflect that in my later work.
But other than the upsetting revelations, the color was exciting, and it did feel like an extension of the show. So when you saw the first strip, which was Danger in Hyperspace, which I believe is this one right here, in your young Fireball XL5 fans' mind's eye, did this feel like another episode of the show?
Oh yes, and the thing is, of course, to some extent, the strips outmatch the stuff that was on the screen, because the screen obviously has got its limitations. The puppets could do so much. And although I thoroughly believed in them as characters, when you see them drawn, they can just move more naturalistically, and there are some very dramatic. You can see the angles on Fireball, really things that can usually only be done in illustration. I think these days now, with computer animation, you're able to do much more exciting tumbling shots, all that kind of stuff. That's not in any way to denigrate the work that was done on the series, but it took it beyond what it had been on the TV series, and also slightly more. They were generally more serious, I think, as well. I think that's what I think about it.
They're good thoughts to think. So a little bit more kind of peril and consequence,
yes,
on the pages than you could have had on the TV show for all sorts of reasons. Now, you mentioned Mike Noble in that list of greats who sort of work adorn the pages of TV21, and I know hiding behind you
yes,
something rather lovely. Would you like to share that with the group?
I've got two lovelies, but one is the page and one is the cover. Which are you wanting to?
Let's start with the page, and then we can talk about the cover.
Okay, excuse my rudeness in turning away from you.
And the squeaky chair as well. I hate to add, that is the chair.
Yeah, I do apologise. Okay, this is, you can see it's aged CS10 board on the back, and this is a page of original artwork drawn by Mike for the Snowmen story, which is one of the ones that almost everyone who read TV21 will remember because of this memorable image of Fireball entirely surrounded by snowmen. And it's one thing, and Robert gets on his jetmobile. I always like the fact that Robert got his own stories in the strip form. And again, you've got Fireball shooting through the ice and all that kind of stuff. Look at this astonishingly lovely panel. That's just water ice melting, and it's effortless because he's a genius. It looks effortless because he can just do that sort of thing. And so I'm a very proud owner of this, and it turns up, of course, in the anthology, and it's a wonder to behold, I think.
So it is a beautiful strip. One of many beautiful strips, particularly Mike's.
Oh yeah.
But as you said, there's some Ron Embleton and plenty of other stuff in there. All the kind of the top artists of the era. So you've already kind of given us a little forewarning of the cover. So this is the cover of the anthology. Again, if you missed it earlier on, or if you just want to see it again, I'm very happy to see it again. And it's a lovely thing. So what is the origin of the cover, Lee?
Well, Mike would do commissions occasionally for the Lucky Few, and I managed to badger him. When I got to know him, I suddenly thought, oh my gosh, I could actually commission him to do a piece of actual Fireball XL5 work. I didn't have that page at the time, so I managed to find that since. But so he had a sort of stock set of images that he would do variants for people as commissions, and this was one similar pose to one that he'd previously done, but I suggested he do it on an ice planet because, of course, the Abominable Snow, that's a different show entirely. The Snowmen story was still very large in my mind, and so he painted. I'll have to move this, so we'll have to bear with me, viewers. This is original, and I took a scan of that and then carefully rearranged it and put a different sky on to produce the cover, because I thought it would be a terrific thing to have a piece of Mike's work on there which hadn't been seen but which was related and unique. It's a unique piece in itself, so I was very pleased to do that. I had to move everything around on it, but of course, my years and years of cheating skills came into play, and I moved it around fairly successfully, I think. But
I think it's called expertise rather than cheating skills, but okay.
Okay.
It works beautifully, and it's so nice to have Mike's art on the cover, a lovely nod to a giant in the world of comics, really.
I think so.
Yeah, and I mean, you were friends with Mike, of course. So I mean, what do you think he would think of his work being represented in this way?
Well, he'd be delighted, I think, and he would be also, because he's a very humble person. He'd be
Extremely.
and he would go, "Oh no, I can't believe anyone would make so much fuss about it." But I think he'd also be extremely happy and feel some vindication or validation in a way that he always felt slightly in the shadow of Embleton and Bellamy, because he's a slightly different type of artist. But I think for many people, and they are both terrific artists. I mean, Bellamy's a magical use of line, very minimal line work, and great design, got a total sense of graphic design about all those pages. Embleton had a fantastic style, which is it's really hard to emulate it at all, because it's thin washes, which is a very surprising thing. I finally got to see some original pages, and he'd got a fantastic modeling kind of technique, so that the skin would all look really interesting. And he went on to work in all kinds of glamour publications, because he could make beautiful women look, dolled up. So he was fantastic too. And Mike, I think, and they have tended to get the lion's share of the praise. But Mike, to me, looking at it from a storyteller's point of view, his work is just immaculate. He always tells the story really clearly. He's extremely good technically, so that you rarely get errors in drawing. Something I'm a bit of a stickler for, because I trained as a technical illustrator, and so that sort of comes through in what I do, probably to my detriment. But Mike was able to do that, but still have tremendous sense of dynamism, and in particular the figures. I remember talking about it with someone else, and it's like you see the figures, they kind of dance across the page. They are always somehow in midair, and that is, I have tried to do that with my own work, and it utterly fails, because I'm just not as good an artist. I just can't do it. But he would have people kind of just lifting off the ground. Horses, he was a particularly good artist at horses and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, they're tricky, aren't they, horses?
They are very tricky things, and it took me a long time to figure out that they didn't have their eyes looking forward. Anyway, but yeah, Mike was a master of all that kind of stuff, and more or less anything he gave him to draw was fantastic. There is a sort of moment where it almost breaks down, because Mike did this story that's in the anthology, where animals are suddenly boosted to very, very large size. So there's a field mouse or something which bursts through into the spaceship or wherever it was, and it's too much like an actual mouse to be particularly savage. So it becomes it's a strangely surreal piece. But he's just a brilliant artist. There's no two ways about it. His color technique is fantastic. He did layers and layers of wash, so that colors would be built up gradually, so that he would go over the same red several times until he got just amazing. And so I saw his studio. I'm very fortunate to become friends with him, and he wouldn't let you watch him draw at all, because he wouldn't let you see the magic happen. So you never know quite how he did things, but you could see that all the areas where he'd still got the original inks that he'd been using back in the 60s, I think some of them, and little drags of colour on pieces of paper where he was testing the brush and so on. Amazing draftsman, really.
Some lovely work. In fact, when you mentioned about the larger than life animals, I instantly thought of that image with that glorious butterfly getting slapped. And there's just so much lovely stuff in even that. It's sort of simple and yet dynamic and complex all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, in some people's hands, a butterfly threat would not come across very well.
Yeah.
And I think it's tough even for Mike, but he does extremely well. And of course, the rest of it is all presented. You saw then all the kind of different angles used to kind of lead you in and out of the story and take you to the next panel and so on. Fantastic work.
Yeah.
He was doing 2 of those pages a week and posting them off on a train to London on a Friday night. And, and he never saw them again until, I think, I don't know, whatever it was, 50 years later, I turned up with a friend of mine, Paul Holder, and we had acquired on loan some of the artboards, and that was the first time he'd seen them since posting them off. So
amazing.
He would have been really pleased with this, though, because it's such a great body of work.
Yeah, well, I hope they all would, and it's a great celebration of some tremendous artists. And there's hundreds of pages. The tome runs over 330 pages. Yeah, there's all sorts of a variety of stories, but it's everything from TV21. Now, in TV21, these days the shared universe is all a very big thing, and it's terribly modern and avant-garde to do so. Well, maybe not avant-garde now, but it's the thing to do. But of course, TV21 was exploring that many years before, and so there are pages in this anthology which stray from the world of Fireball XL5. So again, as an original reader, when you see things like a Stingray strip turn up with Steve Zodiac's name mentioned, was that an added thrill, or did it just feel like, oh, well, obviously they're all in the same universe?
Well, it was both, I think. I remember those things happening and thinking, oh, they are in the same universe then, because I kind of assumed they were, because I think, I don't know, Century 21 hadn't come along, it was sort of latterly, but you got the feeling that they were all of the same stable, and then you got a new feeling that, oh, well, yeah, okay, so there's the world, Space Patrol, and there's also the Wasps are there as well. That's really good. And then I think Captain Scarlet also turns up at some. Well, I know he does. I don't know. I'm beating about the bush there. He certainly does turn up in the strips as well, and that crossover with the Fireballs. So, it was terrific idea, and you kind of, but then you started to think about some of the difficulties with that, but it didn't matter, because just the idea that they might all meet at some stage.
Yes.
All that kind of stuff might be fantastic.
I think it's a bit like the multi-Doctor meeting thing for the Who fans. There's a thrill to imagine how they might interact.
Yeah, it's a story is almost irrelevant. It's just the idea that they would interact, and
see them on the same page. Exactly. So I mean, well, we've seen the Stingray page. You mentioned Scarlet. Lady Penelope is another one. This connects up with the assassination of the Kaplan. Is that right? Forgive me if I've got that wrong.
The little jelly bean creatures called the Astrons, and they it always puzzled me how they managed to make so much technology, but I suppose that's because the little jelly bean things that float around on discs, but that's a fantastic story which is in here. One of the most amazing pieces of crowd artwork I've ever seen was in that, where there's an assassination. I'm sorry, I'm giving away a plot point here, but there's an assassination, and it's obviously not that far removed from when Kennedy was assassinated. Very heavily in everyone's mind still, and then Lady Penelope, in her own strip, actually deals with one of the people involved in that, and that proved a bit of a springboard.
Yeah, I mean it's just such a lovely, forward-thinking, expansive idea to include those other characters and get them involved with plots which really focus on XL5 but can go elsewhere. So I mean, we've been very much beating about the bush for some time, because if you saw the cover, you see mentions of Thunderbirds and Stingray and Captain Scarlet, and then you're thinking, well, hang on, what's this bloke Lee Sullivan doing here? Because he didn't do Fireball XL5.
No.
Or did he? Now, don't give too much away. We don't want to go too crazy, but if you know your TV21, you'll know how many strips there are of Fireball XL5. And so when I say there's 336 pages, you think, well, even allowing for end papers and a forward and stuff, there's too many pages. So you've been doing some other stuff, haven't you? Exploring this shared universe. So giving away as little as possible while still being tantalizing. Could you just tell us this, sort of how this came about, our initial discussions, and then we will show one little sneak peek, a little landscape panel from part of these new strips. So what happened? I called you and we had a chat, right?
Yeah, I think it was something along that. You came up with the idea. I think initially you thought you might reproduce some of the strips, maybe not all of them. That's my memory of it anyway. That's certainly what I imagined. And then you said it might be quite good if we had some linking pages, which would gather some of those things together. And with that in mind, I just thought, that I could maybe do that. I could draw that, and I don't know if you had me in mind, but as soon as you'd actually mentioned it to me, that was the end of it, really. It had to be me, because I'd have killed whoever had got the job otherwise.
That's actually right.
The other thing that it almost crept on me without noticing was I decided I'd write the story. Which was, I didn't even ask. That's terrible, isn't it? I've never written a comic strip story in my life, and I'll be doing that. I don't think we even actually discussed it.
I think you just sent a draft in.
I sent the draft in as the kind of story that it might be, and it all kind of springboard from that Penelope story. I think that was really where it kind of started. And there was also another incident with Captain Scarlet, and once I started to think about how you might link those together, because that became the next conversation, was how we could actually have one story which linked them all together. That was the really interesting bit. And once I started thinking about it, it was very strange, because I'm not especially got any ambitions to write, but the ideas just came really quickly and I was almost overtaken by them. I had to kind of pare them back in the end. There were certain things I wanted to do which we couldn't. We wanted to have all kinds of conversations between all the characters. But once I realised you could do it, it opened up all sorts of interesting possibilities. And also I found playing around with my toys, because this is not my entire range of toys to do with this series, as longer term viewers will know. But all my toys are locked away. I recently moved house, and they're all locked away in cold storage at the moment, so they'll come back. But I had two particular vehicles, and I was trying to think of what we might do, and then I realised that they might actually, their configuration was quite interesting, and I think that's as big a cue as I can give you.
To bring up the panel.
Bring up the panel, yeah.
Here it is.
So I realised, yes, how did that happen? It was obviously on a hot date. I was playing around with a couple of toys, and I realised that they're both about 300 foot in length. Supposedly, the I suppose it's what is that, 100 meters or something. Anyway, so similar kind of scale, and I had the two toys. I was just doing this, and they fit together. They actually, literally, you can fit them together. So I thought that would be a great thing if we can have Thunderbird 3 involved in docking with Fireball XL5. How might that come about? So that was really how it went, really. But what was fascinating actually was, and I'm sure everybody who's tried to do a multi-Doctor story or any of those things where there's crossovers, is you have to remember what point of view you're working from. And because, you know, when back in the day when the three Doctors met, it was still John Pertwee's Doctor's show. And so the others were kind of interlopers. And what was also surprising, kind of shocking to me at the time, was they didn't always get on. Thought that was the thing. Well, it would be lovely if they were all together, and actually, what they are is completely at odds with each other. And of course, that's drama. That's the essence of drama: is conflict and tension between characters. So that was quite interesting, and I found that coming along. I could have developed that a bit more. I was going to have one character getting extremely jealous of another character's receiving the attentions of the third party, and it's kind of in there, but it's much more subtly knocked back. There wasn't room for it in the end. I added, I think, 2 or 3 extra pages to the original brief because I just couldn't cram it all in otherwise.
But they're worth it. I'm glad you did, because seeing the drawings and stuff come through. Now we will be revealing further pages in a future broadcast. It won't be too far away.
I look forward.
We just don't want to give everything away at once, and you know, kind of just to make sure that you're excited. We're very excited, and having seen the pages, there are some amazing kind of inter-organizational meetings, shall we say? A couple of which are. They're actually quite kind of emotional to look at. It sounds a bit ridiculous, but they are. Really? to see those characters and craft brought together in a unifying kind of function, I guess. Yeah. Again, I'm trying not to spoil the plot, but it is really lovely and it fits in beautifully. And I think you've done an excellent job. And I'm sure people will love it, because it does what TV21 was already trying to do, but maybe bigger.
Well, I don't think they pursued it very much. I think that there were again, you have this problem of which point of view are you taking. So if you're in a Scarlet story, it's got to be that Captain Scarlet, and in this, Captain Scarlet is not the main character, but he's in it a lot, and he pushes the story along inadvertently. But it's based on one of the original crossovers in there. So everything I've tried to do, I've tried to connect as well as I can. There are obviously some people it will offend, because it will worry them about timelines, and because there's an awful lot of subculture about which timelines they're all in. And I thought, well, you know, you can't let that stand in the way of getting on with the story. And also, there's another part of the book which explains some of it, and I'm responsible for that too.
Yes, there's a good explainer. I mean, you know, if you try and stick slavishly to canon and continuity in stuff where canon and continuity were not that big a thing, everything becomes impossible and stuff grinds to a halt. So I think you've got the perfect balance here of making it fit with the series continuity, the TV21 continuity, but still having a rip-roaring adventure that's sort of worthy of the pages of TV Century 21. So
if I've achieved that, then that'll be a lifetime's ambition achieved. It was great fun to work on, but you're also aware all the time of standing on the shoulders or trying to look over the shoulders of giants, you know. And I don't, you know, I had them in mind all the time I was doing it, and that's all you can do. Is the best really that you can manage.
Absolutely. Well, just doing it from that perspective, I think, is a big thing. That really helps. So fans will soon be able to judge for themselves. Positively, I'm certain. The book goes on pre-order later this month. There will be a special edition, and Lee and I will tell you about that in a future broadcast. We'll have a trailer coming up in the next couple of weeks with some preview pages, just to give you a hint of what's inside, both classic and new. And well, I'm very excited. I think there are going to be a lot of very happy people seeing XL5 collected in this way, and with some extra material and story too. So, Lee, thank you very much for all of your hard work and for joining me and for displaying a tiny 0.5% of your collection of toys and stuff. And I believe that's time for you to go.
as if on cue.
That was amazing.
It's been fantastic. I hope you enjoy the books. Bye bye.
Great chatting. Go and answer the door. Goodbye.
Bye bye.